Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and it's time for part 2 of my wide receiver rankings. The first video, we talked about the top 11 players. In this video, we're moving on to the top 24. So I think the tipping point and the tiebreaker for a lot of these names is going to be my projection on touchdowns. I think that's the main difference between these players. Let's take a look at this chart here, which does track all of the wide receiver points per game from last season. Those are the dark blue dots. There are stats from 2023 in light blue, and then some smaller sample sizes in red and green that are more or less likely to repeat depending on the circumstances. So the dark blue stats on this chart are really the ones that matter most. And if you notice, the gap between wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 12 is about 6 points. We have Jamar Chase at 20 points per game, and then last year wide receiver 12 was tied between Davante Adams and AJ Brown and CeeDee Lamb at 14.1 points per game. So that's kind of a wide gap at the top. And then these next 12 players, this next handful, is all centered in like a 2.5 less than 3 point gap between them all. It's a very flat tier in the next 12 to 20 names. At wide receiver 12 last year, we had Adams at 14.1. And then at wide receiver 24, we had Cooper Kupp at 11.7. So most of the time, the differentiating factor is touchdowns, like I mentioned. And that's why at wide receiver 12, I'm going to stick with Davante Adams. He did put up this type of production last season. While he did miss 3 games, I don't think it was a major red flag. He was trying to force a trade out of Las Vegas. And as soon as he was a New York Jet, he was fully healthy. So I think last year's injury was not really something to project moving forward. He is 32 years old, and that is a red flag. He will turn 33 in December. But I still trust Adams to be really good on the field. Last year in New York with the Jets, his numbers jumped up to 14.6 points per game. That was tied with Amon-Ra St. Brown for wide receiver 8 on a points per game basis. So he still has that elite ceiling available to him. The only thing is he's no longer the wide receiver 1 in his offense. He will be behind Puka Nacua with the Rams. However, Puka is not a major threat in the red zone. Puka in 28 career games has only scored 10 touchdowns. That's a touchdown rate of 35%. We know Davante Adams is elite in that department. And last year with the Jets, he averaged a touchdown 64% of the time. So if last year's numbers do repeat, we're almost going to project twice as many touchdowns for Adams in this offense as Puka. And with Matthew Stafford, I think there could be a feeding frenzy in the red zone. I'm not a full believer that Kyren Williams retains his dominance in the red zone like he has the last 2 seasons. I think they've wanted to throw the ball more, but with Cooper Kupp's injury risk, it has not been viable. They moved off of Cooper Kupp for a reason, and Adams was the most coveted wide receiver in free agency. They paid him $22 million per year on a 2-year deal, and if I'm going to bet on Adams to be elite in one of those seasons, it's going to be when he is younger, not older. So I'm going to trust Davante Adams this year. He's one of my favorite picks overall. I take him like crazy in round 3 of underdog drafts. I will be targeting him in redraft as well. I love Davante Adams. He's helped me win some championships over the years. I got a soft spot for my boy Davante. So really optimistic. I think he has the potential to score 15 touchdowns this year, and I expect the yardage to be pretty similar. I don't think 14 points is an unrealistic expectation. Last year, he averaged over 75 yards per game. The volume, I don't think is going to come down very much. So I like him a lot. We've seen a lot of success in LA in the past, and I trust Matthew Stafford more than just about any other quarterback left in this tier. So he has all the tiebreakers I'm looking for, and I really expect him to pay off. I love Davante Adams this season. At wide receiver 13, it's Tyreek Hill, a player that was wide receiver 1 in points per game just 2 years ago at 19.9. So his range of outcomes is very wide. There's a world where Tyreek Hill is the best pick on the board and does lead to you winning your league. There's also a world where he's as bad as last year and he's an automatic miss the playoffs type of draft pick. So I am worried about it. Last year was really, really terrible. If we look at last year's stats, he was really bad. He was wide receiver 32, tied with Josh Downs and DK Metcalf at 10.5 points per game. That is nothing like what we expected when we drafted Tyreek Hill. So he really was a big disappointment. There is a caveat, though. The fact that Tua Tagovailoa did miss 6 games total definitely didn't help him. The backup quarterback play was pretty brutal last year, and in those 11 games with Tua Tagovailoa healthy on the field, his stats did jump about 2 points per game. He averaged 12.4. That would have been wide receiver 18 in points per game, just behind DeVonta Smith, tied with Ladd McConkey at wide receiver 18 in points per game. So there is that floor that we can trust. I think this season will probably be a little bit better for guys like Tyreek Hill in Miami because Jonnu Smith is gone and he dominated in the target share. Jonnu had 111 targets last year. Some of those you would hope are going to Tyreek Hill. I'm not convinced they're all going to go to Darren Waller and Jalen Waddle. So at some point, his volume is inevitably going to move up. However, there are some terrible vibes with him right now in Miami. I'm concerned about the comments he made back in February when he was trying to get traded. The way that Tua responded to the media is not emblematic of a high trust level between those two players. So he's becoming a big headache. He always has been immature, and it's no surprise there's some trade rumors regarding Tyreek Hill. If they start off the season terribly, I could easily envision another team trading for him if the Dolphins GM and front office decides to jump ship on this year. If Tua gets another concussion in week 4, I could see them really get a tailspin going with Zach Wilson. And if they start off 2-5, I would expect them to really cut bait. So Tyreek Hill could be on the move, might not finish the season with the Dolphins, but there's always the scenario where he finds a better landing spot and is even more valuable in fantasy. So he's 31 years old, but I just ranked Davante Adams at 32 years old above him. So I'm not worried about that so much so as I am the chemistry with Tua and the Dolphins offense just fading overall. I'm a little worried about it, but 2 years ago, he was wide receiver 1, and that's something I just can't forget. So good luck with Tyreek. I hope it works out. The vibes are off, but the potential is still there. Now let's move on to wide receiver 14, where I have T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. And last year, T. Higgins was a league winner. I'm not expecting him to be that good again, but it's definitely in the range of outcomes that he's a league winner once again. He was tied with Justin Jefferson at wide receiver 4 in points per game last season. 15.6 is not something to ignore. So he has that elite potential. His touchdown rate was fantastic last year. He scored 10 touchdowns in 12 games, and 83% in the touchdown department is very hard to replicate. So don't want to dismiss him. He's a potential league winner. However, injuries have been a problem. It's 2 straight seasons where T. Higgins has missed 5 total games. Last year only played 12. The year before that only played 12 again. And if you look back to 2023, it was a worst case scenario. We saw wide receiver 42 in points per game from T. Higgins. 9.7 is terrible. So that's the major risk. Not only can he miss a third of the season, if not more, he can also really revert back to his worst case scenario. But they paid him a ton this offseason to keep him in Cincinnati. Their offense is very narrow. I don't see the target share changing for T. Higgins. I guess I did say Adams had the best quarterback in this tier. That was a lie. T. Higgins has the best quarterback in this tier, but he is the wide receiver 2 in his offense behind Jamar Chase, and we've seen a wide range of outcomes. If the touchdowns do not hit, then I would be worried that T. Higgins does burn you, but it's mainly injury as to why I'm not ranking him any higher than I am. The missed games I'm expecting from T. Higgins are a headache, and it's very frustrating to have him in the IR slot and need to work the waiver wire when you are desperate to just make the playoffs in the final weeks of the season. So just like Nico Collins, a player I downgraded slightly due to injury risk, in redraft I do care about that a lot, and it's why I'm not going to put T. Higgins at number 12. I got him behind the old guys, Davante Adams and Tyreek Hill. But he's not that old. He's only 26 and a half years old, and he's still in his prime. If not for the soft tissue leg injuries, I would probably rank him in the top 10. I think he's possibly more valuable than A.J. Brown and Ladd McConkey. The injury risk is legit, and it's why I'm not going to die on the hill of you need to draft T. Higgins. He's good, but last year we got him like 2 rounds cheaper, and that price was definitely more enticing than it is at the moment. So go ahead and take him in the 3rd round. I think he's a fine priced option at that point. But in the 2nd round, I'd rather just opt for an elite running back I have ranked in the top 10. So T. Higgins at 14. Now let's move on to the back half of this tier. I still think there's an argument that these players should be ranked at number 12, but we have not quite seen that elite athleticism from these options. But JSN is my wide receiver 15 this year, and I'm really hopeful for JSN because last year he definitely overtook DK Metcalf for wide receiver 1 in his offense. So before that happened, I'm willing to throw out those games entirely, but once DK Metcalf did get hurt, JSN's numbers jumped from 11.9 on the season up to 12.7 per game in those final 8 games. That was wide receiver 17, tied with DeVonta Smith in points per game last season. So he already showed us he can be a top 20 receiver, and I'm expecting a leap in year 3 because now he is overwhelmingly by far and away the top option in his offense. I do not trust Cooper Kupp. They got rid of Tyler Lockett. They also traded away DK Metcalf, and at some point we're going to get a handful of games from JSN without Cooper Kupp on the field. So I'm really hopeful that JSN is a dominant player in terms of target share. The only other options behind him are rookie tight end Elijah Arroyo, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, who is coming from the Clint Kubiak system in New Orleans last year, and rookie Torrey Horton, who is coming off an injury but has been healthy in training camp. So a lot of question marks, a lot of unreliable chemistry with other players. There is a new quarterback in town, Sam Darnold, but we know for a fact JSN is going to be his top target. So that is the floor from JSN, a top 17 wide receiver in my opinion. But I think there's a world where his ceiling is even higher, and there are 2 games last year that we can look to when it comes to the full potential for JSN. There were 2 weeks last season when DK Metcalf was off the field with injury, and in those 2 games, JSN popped off. He was averaging 21.7 points per game in those 2 matchups, an average of 10 targets per game, 6.5 catches for 124 yards per game, and did score 2 touchdowns in that sample size, an average of 19.2 yards per reception. So that was elite. Wide receiver 1 overall is his potential if those games without DK Metcalf are able to repeat on a full season. That's probably not going to happen. 2 games is a very small sample size, but I'm optimistic that it is emblematic of his potential. I could see JSN average like 16, 17 points per game, and it wouldn't shock me. If the touchdowns are there, I think the volume will be there to carry him. Last year he had 137 targets, and I think it's going up. I think he will eclipse 150 this season. So it's possible it goes up above 160. Maybe we have a Malik Neighbors situation on our hands where he puts up 175 targets this year. I doubt that happens, but entering year 3, I think he's about to step into his prime. I think JSN is about to be a lock in your lineup this season. Wide receiver 15, you are drafting JSN at his floor. Love his value in round 3. I think he could be a top 5 receiver this time next season if everything goes right. Number 16 is one of his former teammates, Garrett Wilson, also out of Ohio State. Garrett Wilson is a year and a half older, and I think the range of outcomes are very, very wide. It's just like JSN, a player entering his prime with a lot of upside and very little target competition. While JSN does have Cooper Kupp, Garrett Wilson has no one to compete with targets with him in New York, and the quarterback play is perhaps a little bit worse. I do trust Darnold a little bit more than I trust Justin Fields in the passing game, but Fields has a tendency to lock onto one target and kind of only focus on them. The fact that Fields played with Garrett Wilson in college is also a very good sign that that chemistry is not going to go anywhere, and he's going to be a, tractor beam just locking on to him every single week this season. So I could also see 170 targets coming for Garrett Wilson. They gave him a big contract extension. I'm just worried that Justin Fields is not going to get him the ball in the red zone very often. Like I mentioned, the deciding factor for me in this tier is going to come down to touchdowns and how likely they are to hit. So in the Jets offense, I'm worried we're going to get less than 5 touchdowns from Garrett Wilson this season. If he goes over 10, I'd be pretty surprised. So that's my main red flag. I don't trust Justin Fields that much, but the Jets are probably going to be a bad team in general, and odds are in the second half of games, the game script will be benefiting throwing the ball to try and catch up. So you expect that to be a Garrett Wilson free-for-all. I think there's going to be a lot of garbage time where his numbers get padded, and there is a world where he does put up like 1,500 yards overall on the season. So that's what I'm hopeful for. The DJ Moore season we saw 2 years ago in Chicago, if that happens in the 12 games when Fields was active 2 years ago with DJ Moore averaged 16.1 points per game. So there's always some injury risk with Fields, and if we get Tyrod Taylor, that's not going to be great, but it's not the end of the world. When he's active, I'm really hopeful that he does just lock on to Garrett Wilson. There's really no other option to do that with. So that's what I think will carry you, volume more so than anything, but touchdowns are going to be a headache. I think the ceiling might be capped, but the floor is one of the safest you can find. Next up, let's talk about Xavier Worthy, my wide receiver 17. In this tier, I could argue to rank him as high as number 12, but it's only because of the Rashee Rice suspension. I would not have trusted Worthy as much if Rashee Rice was going to play a full season, but it looks like there is no chance of that happening. And based on what he did, driving away from a crime scene that injured several people, I'm worried he misses like 6 games, maybe even more. It's probably going to be at least 4, 5, 6 games for Rashee Rice in terms of suspension. So if Rashee Rice misses that first month, give Xavier Worthy all the runway he can get. He's an extremely fast player, the fastest player we've ever seen at the combine. And we also saw the potential for him down the field in garbage time in the Super Bowl. He put up 37 fantasy points in the Super Bowl. It didn't really matter, though. They were never competitive in that matchup, but it's emblematic of his upside. He has probably some of the highest spike week potential of any player. I think he's a better best ball selection than redraft, but I think early on he's going to help you rack up some wins. With Rashee Rice off the field, he could help you start off 5-1, and then you have a lot of roster flexibility as you expect to make the playoffs with that type of record. So that's what I'm hopeful for when I draft Xavier Worthy, a shit ton of points early in the season. That's my hopeful optimism with Xavier Worthy, but now it's time for the dreaded pessimism. He was nowhere near this last season in points per game. He was barely top 40 at the position. He averaged only 9.9 points per game, and that ranked as wide receiver 38, tied with Chris Olave, right behind guys like Zay Flowers, Jaden Reed, and Darnell Mooney. He was not that valuable last season. And last year, he played most of the year without Rashee Rice as well. So that was not an excuse that we can point to, Rashee Rice stealing his targets. But just like most rookies, the beginning of the year is never as good as the second half. They're trying to find their footing. They're getting more acclimated to the NFL. By the time we hit the second half of the season, he was far, far better. And these are the stats I'm going to trust. In the second half of the year, in the final 7 games, weeks 11 through 17, he was the wide receiver 17 in points per game. 12.8 was on par with the sample size I curated for JSN. Also the sample size I curated for Garrett Wilson when Davante Adams was not with the team. He was also averaging 12.8 points per game. So I think you're getting a top 20 receiver, especially when Rashee Rice is off the field. You have access to a top 10 receiver, and that's what I'm going to trust. I think a first round draft pick is going to pay off in this Chiefs offense sooner rather than later. Travis Kelce also turns 36 years old in October. Marquise Hollywood Brown is one of the most injury-prone receivers we've ever seen. I expect Xavier Worthy to be the number 1 target in this offense for the majority of the season. Maybe when Rashee Rice returns, it's a different story, but I'm willing to bet that Worthy still retains top 20 value. I think the ceiling is too high to ignore in this offense. So going to trust the touchdown potential in the Chiefs offense. The Kansas City wide receiver 1 is a top 20 wide receiver in my opinion. So that's tier 5, wide receivers 12 through 17. We have Davante Adams, Tyreek Hill, T. Higgins, JSN, Garrett Wilson, and Xavier Worthy. I think the highest floors you can be drafting are players like JSN and Garrett Wilson. I absolutely trust them to finish the season with a shit ton of points. But Davante Adams, I think, has the highest ceiling for 10 plus touchdowns. Tyreek Hill has that ceiling for 130 yards per game like he had 2 years ago. T. Higgins could be elite when healthy, but probably going to miss another 4 or 5 games. And then Xavier Worthy could be the wide receiver 1 in the first 5 games, could also be barely top 30 once Rashee Rice comes back on the field. So those are my top 17 receivers. Very valuable. I think they are kind of locked in to the top 20. But this next tier, I think, could outscore them. I think odds are, though, there are more floor plays and better flex options. I think they'll be in the top 25, top 30, rather than top 15 overall. But at number 18 is a player that's been extremely safe, extremely reliable the last 5 seasons. It's Terry McLaurin of the Washington Commanders, but he does drop down a tier given his injury and contract concerns. Up until the day before I recorded this, yesterday, Terry McLaurin was fully intent on a contract holdout. He is being paid less than Deebo Samuel at the moment, a player they just traded for, and he's entering the final year of his contract. He is looking for upwards of $30 million per season. And given the rookie contract they have Jaden Daniels under, I think he might get it. I expect Terry McLaurin to be on the field. That's what we've seen from him every game the last 4 years. He has 4 straight years with 17 games played. On top of staying healthy, he's played 5 straight seasons with a minimum 77 receptions. Last year it was 82. The career high is 87, and 1,000 plus yards. Last year it was 1,096. He has never gone over 1,200 yards, but 5 straight seasons of over 1,000 yards with terrible quarterback play. The difference maker for him last year with Jaden Daniels was in the touchdown department. He scored 13 touchdowns, and the previous 4 years, he was maxing out at just 5. So there is a world where he reverts back to his floor in that department. If he only scores 5 touchdowns again next season, you are not going to get a return on investment. And the fact he's nursing an ankle injury, he's turning 30 years old in a couple months, not very encouraging, but still, I think the safety net with Terry is undeniable. And you know for a fact, once he's on the field, I still think he's going to be Jaden Daniels' top target, the most trusted option in that offense overall. So I'm going to rely on him. I'm not going to rank him in the same tier as JSN and Garrett Wilson. I think he is a less reliable option. I think there is less safety regard with Terry this season because of the reliance on touchdowns. I think there is a world where he burns you. But last year he was top 15 in points per game. He was just behind Drake London at 13.3 points per game. The season before that, though, in 2023, he was just like T. Higgins, not even a top 40 receiver, averaged 9.6 points in 2023. Last year it jumped up to 13.3, and it required 8 extra touchdowns on the season. So that's not guaranteed to repeat. It could be a bad range of outcomes for him if the touchdowns disappear, but odds are I think he will go over at least 9 or 8 touchdowns again this season. I trust Jaden Daniels in this offense to score at a high rate. So I think they're going to score a lot of points. I think Terry's going to be their top option. I'm not going to overthink it. At worst, you're getting a very safe top 30 receiver, but at wide receiver 18, you would be disappointed if that's where he finished. So good luck. I hope the injury risk does not creep up again, but I'm willing to trust that the safety net he's offered the last 5 years continues. He's been a staple of consistency. Next up at wide receiver 19, I think does carry a lot of risk, but Courtland Sutton was really, really productive last year, and I'm not willing to give up on him just because they added Evan Ingram and drafted Pat Bryant. If anything, Bo Nix might take a leap in year 2. Last year, Sean Payton was kind of slow to give him the full reins in the passing game, and it really did click in the second half of the season. If we remove the first half of Bo Nix's rookie year, Courtland Sutton was averaging 14.6 points per game in the final 8 games of the season. Weeks 10 through 18, when Bo Nix was throwing it a lot more. His top target was clearly Courtland Sutton. He was sending him 8.4 targets per game, 5.6 catches per game, 73 yards per game, and did score 6 touchdowns in that sample size. A 75% touchdown rate is elite. So that's what we're hoping for with Sutton. He can return to that dominance, put up top 10 numbers. If he does, he's going to be a league winner where he's being drafted. But if you look at his entire season, if you don't cherry pick at all, he was not top 20 overall in points per game. He was wide receiver 23, averaging 11.8 points per game. He played all 17 games though, and did finish in the top 12 overall in total points. He was wide receiver 11. He put up 199.8 on the year. So that is what I'm hoping for, a very consistent option. If he stays healthy, he's going to stay just as consistent as Terry McLaurin. I would expect at least 1,000 yards and roughly 80 plus catches if he remains healthy. But the touchdowns are going to be the deciding factor. He's been the top touchdown scorer in Denver, though. Last year it was 8 total touchdowns, and the year before that it was 10 from Russell Wilson. So I could see a scenario where he goes over double digits again in touchdowns. Maybe Evan Ingram, though, does cap the ceiling, and that's why I'm not willing to trust him in the top 10. But I think his floor is top 25, and based on the health consistency he has offered the last few seasons, I do trust him to remain active and available in your lineup. I think that is valuable and a tiebreaker in this tier. So good luck with Sutton. I think from a floor standpoint, you have a bust-proof pick, but from a ceiling standpoint, I am a bit concerned he does not tap into that top 10 value we did get a glimpse of late last season. At wide receiver 20, though, a player who's been really a guy you've never wanted to underestimate and has really overperformed expectation as he's gotten older. I have Mike Evans at wide receiver 20. He will be 32 years old this season, but I do have Davante Adams at 32 years old at wide receiver 12. So I'm not going to pretend like the age is a non-factor, but it's not going to be something that just dismisses a player for me as well. It's all about context, and I believe Mike Evans has one more year left in the tank where he's going to be the image of consistency. Yet again, I'm expecting 1,000 receiving yards from Mike Evans. That has been the standard every single year of his career. Even since he was a rookie, 1,000 yards is a guarantee for Mike Evans. Even though he missed 3 games last year, he did still put up 1,000 plus yards. It took him week 18 to do it, but still that happened. And now he's tied with Jerry Rice for the most consecutive seasons cracking that number. I expect this time next year he owns the record outright and will do it again. I think it will happen in this Bucs offense. The real optimism for Mike Evans is the fact that Chris Godwin may never be the same, may not be on the field until like week 10 based off the gruesome ankle injury he suffered last season. It was a full dislocation of the ankle. It looked like his foot was barely hanging on by like a door hinge to the rest of his leg. It was a gruesome injury for Chris Godwin last year. But Godwin will return at some point. When that happens, there's going to be a crowded target share in Tampa, because not only is Godwin going to be there, they also drafted Emeka Egbuka in the first round with their 19th overall pick. So that is going to be a major concern. Mike Evans' target share is not going to look like it did in the back half of last season. And that back half is really inflating the numbers from Mike Evans. Last year, he was tied with Malik Neighbors in points per game at wide receiver 9. 14.5 was his average, and that's elite. If that's what we get from Mike Evans again, he's going to be a league winner at this price in ADP. But I'm not convinced that repeats, because in the 7 games without Chris Godwin on the field, he was wide receiver 3, averaging over 17 points per game. He put up 17.3 points in the last 7 games when Godwin was off the field. If we look at the 7 games when Godwin was healthy, he was clearly the wide receiver 2 in his offense, and his numbers were not as impressive. He averaged 11.8 points per game. That was tied with Courtland Sutton for wide receiver 23 in points per game. So it was a clear tale of 2 seasons for Mike Evans. He played 7 weeks with Chris Godwin, was barely top 25 at the position. Then he got hurt at the same time that Godwin got hurt, and when he came back 3 weeks later, Godwin was not on the field, and all of Godwin's production went to Mike Evans. He was a top 3 option in all of fantasy at the receiver position. So that is the upside we have access to with Mike Evans. He could average 17 points again this season, especially when Godwin's off the field. Or Egbuka could be that legit and could relegate him to the wide receiver 2 early in the season, and then when Godwin returns, Mike Evans might be the wide receiver 3 in the offense. There's also Jalen McMillan, a very legit threat to steal some touchdowns and targets from him as well. The crowded nature of this passing game is going to be a headache with Evans, and I think it will frustrate you more so in the second half of the year during the fantasy playoffs. He might help you win some games early on, but might be a big headache in the back half of the season if he is not scoring touchdowns at an elite rate. And just like Terry McLaurin, there is a chance that falls off as well. Mike Evans, though, has consistently put up double-digit touchdowns each of the last 4 seasons in Tampa. So the quarterback play is pretty good with Baker Mayfield. You trust the Bucs offense in general. I still think Evans is a valuable pick, but I'm a little less excited to draft him at 32 years old, knowing that with a healthy receiving core, he was not top 20 at the position, but I have him right behind Courtland Sutton, the player he was tied with in that sample size. So there is half of the year for Sutton and Evans that is truly elite. There's also half of the year that's just not top 20 and more of a flex play. I'm going to rank them both top 20 though, because I think that ceiling floor combo is really enticing, not something I want to pass up on. And their age is not too much of a red flag for me to panic over. So good luck with Mike Evans. I hope he stays healthy. I think he will. And I think from a floor standpoint, 1,000 yards is guaranteed. It's just a question of, will that be a consistent like 70 yards per game, or will it, balloon from like 130 yards to like 50, 40 yards the next week? We will see. So that's it for the top 20, but this tier does extend another 4 players. I think this tier is very flat. Wide receivers 15 through 25 are all averaging somewhere between 13 and 11.5 points per game. So let's move forward with these last 4 players. At wide receiver 21 is where I'm getting back in for some upside. I got Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions here at wide receiver 21. At age 24, entering his 4th year in the NFL, now is the time for a breakout. He is a first-round pick, so they could pick up his 5th-year option, but in general, this will be the season that decides how much his second contract is going to be valued at. So he has a lot to play for. He missed basically the entire first 2 seasons of his career. He was never on the field, whether it was coming off an injury as a rookie or getting suspended and never getting his footing in the offense. It took until year 3 last season for him to break out. Last year was a major leap in fantasy points. He averaged 12.2, which was wide receiver 19 on a points per game basis. In 2023, 2 years ago, he only averaged 5 points per game. That was only wide receiver 89 in points per game. So a massive leap forward from this first round pick. He has the speed where he can be an elite difference maker down the field. He did get suspended though. Once again, he missed 2 games last season with a PED suspension, and his decision making is never ideal. He may give the end zone back shots again and perhaps get suspended for excessive celebration. Who knows? But I really trust him in terms of upside. I think from a 20-point ceiling standpoint, I think he's really valuable. I kind of want to rank him just behind Xavier Worthy, but the overall change in offensive coordinator for the Lions does have me a little concerned that maybe this offense is not as good as it was last year with Ben Johnson. The new offensive coordinator is John Morton, a coach who's been in the league since the late 90s and has never been an offensive coordinator or play caller ever before. So there is going to be a learning curve in my opinion, but according to him, he is expecting a breakout season from Jameson Williams. The quote is literally, he's expecting a breakout year from Jameson Williams. And if last year doesn't count as a breakout, then we might get the wide receiver 1 overall in this offense from JMO this season. After all, he does have higher draft capital than Amon-Ra St. Brown, but St. Brown is paid like $30 million per season. I would still trust Amon-Ra to be the safety blanket for Jared Goff. But JMO has that elite upside we're chasing, and if he does overtake Amon-Ra or St. Brown gets hurt, then we might have a league winner on our hands. Last year, he did carry me to a fantasy championship as my flex play with some consistent 20-point games. That was really nice. So I'm optimistic it can happen again. I think Jared Goff does like him a lot, but Sam Laporta was also banged up to start the season. That's going to be a factor in the target share. That's a little bit hard to predict. And if St. Brown was injured as well, he had knee surgery in the offseason to clean up his knee. There is a world where those healthy players do factor in more and stave off JMO's target share a little bit more. So I'm not expecting that much better of a production profile from JMO this season, but he was wide receiver 19 ahead of guys like Sutton, and I am ranking him behind them. I might be ranking him too low. I kind of want to put him as high as Xavier Worthy at wide receiver 17. I could see a world where Jameson Williams absolutely pops off and is a top 12 receiver in fantasy this season. So good luck. I think his underdog ADP of wide receiver 25 in round 4 is a steal. I will happily scoop him up at that ADP all day long. But wide receiver 22 is another wide receiver 2 in his offense. It's a high scoring one. The Philadelphia Eagles, DeVonta Smith, I think is a very safe pick as well this year. Last year, he was wide receiver 17 in points per game. He did miss 4 games though, and averaged 12.7 points per game on the season. That was top 20, so he has that access available to him, but some of those games were without both Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown, and if I remove them and assume everyone's going to stay healthy in Philadelphia, his stats do drop off a decent amount. He averaged 11.3 points per game in 9 games when both AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts were fully healthy. So assuming that's going to be the case this season, you're not getting a top 20 wide receiver anymore. That ranks as wide receiver 29 in points per game. And I am meeting right in the middle between those stats at wide receiver 22. The year before that, in 2023, he was wide receiver 22 exactly in points per game, averaging 11.9. So somewhere in the middle is where I'm going to keep him. I think there is access to a league-winning ceiling, especially if AJ Brown misses time again. In 2 games without AJ Brown, DeVonta Smith averaged 14.1 points per game. That was on par with CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, and Davante Adams last season in points per game. So that's the hopeful optimism. He does have that access to be the number 1 receiver in his offense, a very high scoring team in general. And even if it doesn't, the floor is pretty high. He's a valuable option, often gives you like 75 yards and a touchdown most of the time. So last year he was really productive. Even though he missed 4 weeks with an injury, I still thought he was a difference maker at the position. And I think he can be that once again. I love DeVonta Smith's ADP. He's going in the 5th round these days on Underdog. An absolute steal, a very valuable pick in that range. I draft him like crazy. Even if I don't have Jalen Hurts, I will take DeVonta Smith almost every chance I can get if JMO is off the board. But wide receiver 23 is Tetairoa McMillan, a player I'm really, really optimistic about. The reason I've drank the Kool-Aid on this rookie is because the Panthers offense has actually been really valuable in fantasy at the wide receiver 1 position. Adam Thielen has been really, really good the last 2 seasons with Bryce Young. And 2 years ago, Adam Thielen was wide receiver 32 in points per game. He averaged 10.5 points. But last year, he did jump up to wide receiver 26 in points per game, averaging 11.6 points per game overall. He did miss 7 games, however. He was really banged up, and at his age, he is 34 years old. It's not surprising. So Adam Thielen is not my bet to remain healthy this year. If anything, he might miss another 10 games. But last year, the circumstances for Adam Thielen were not ideal in terms of the clear wide receiver 1. If you recall, they traded for Deontay Johnson and tried to make him work in the beginning of the season. It quickly crashed and burned, and in the first 3 games of the season, Adam Thielen was not as productive when Deontay Johnson was healthy. Then Thielen got hurt for about 7 weeks, and when he returned to the field, Deontay Johnson was cut, no longer with the Panthers. He was long gone. That role as the top option was back in Adam Thielen's lap. And if we look at the final 7 games for Adam Thielen, wide receiver 16 in points per game, just above Terry McLaurin, and right behind Drake London in that stat. So he was a top 20 receiver in a legitimate sample size that I think is absolutely repeatable for who I'm expecting to be the wide receiver 1 in Carolina this season. The volume for Thielen was absolutely something to replicate. He only averaged 7.1 targets per game, 5.7 catches, 72 yards per game, and did score 4 touchdowns in those final 7 games. That is what led to 13.5 fantasy points per game from Adam Thielen. I can easily envision Tetairoa McMillan getting 7+ targets per game from Bryce Young. Dave Canales has been desperate for this wide receiver 1 in this offense. Bryce Young has never had a receiver at this caliber. At 6'4", 219 pounds, Tetairoa McMillan, drafted 8th overall, is going to be the answer this offense has been waiting for. So I think the Panthers are going to take a leap forward in the passing game. I think Tet is going to lead the charge, and with his size, I think he's going to be a go-to target in the red zone especially. So even though the Panthers may not have a crap ton of touchdowns to go around, I think it's going to be kind of consolidated to just a handful of players. I don't expect Leggett to be a big problem. I think Thielen's going to miss some time with injury, and Chuba Hubbard is not going to dominate and hoard all the touchdowns like he did last season. So I think Tet has a phenomenal ceiling. I think he could be elite right out the gate, but even if it takes a while for him to get his footing, I still think he's going to offer top 30 value at the position with the potential to finish in the top 20 pretty easily. One reason why I can't get over him as a good value is when you look at his game log last year in college for Arizona. In week 1, the first game of the season against New Mexico, he had 10 catches for 304 yards and 4 touchdowns. Like, that is an elite ceiling. The potential is through the roof. And while I'm not expecting a 300-yard, 4-touchdown game from Tet this season, I still think you could get a couple weeks with like well over 100 yards and multiple touchdowns out of McMillan in this offense. So I'm very optimistic, maybe foolishly optimistic, but that sample size from Adam Thielen is why I'm encouraged. If he puts up 13.5 points per game, you are getting a steal and a league winner at ADP. So I love Tetairoa McMillan. I'm trusting the draft capital, and because we've never seen it, I'm willing to maybe go a little overboard on my rank. This is where he's going though. He is going at this price on Underdog. I do scoop him up a lot in the 4th round because I think his ceiling is a potential league winner. But the last player in this video, the final player in this tier, is a name you've probably expected me to mention for like pretty much the entirety of this video. It's Marvin Harrison Jr. Some guys have him ranked as wide receiver 12. I still think I'm ranking him too high at wide receiver 24. He was terrible last season. If it wasn't for my blind endorsement on Tetairoa McMillan, I probably would not have any reason to consider Marvin Harrison in the top 25. He was awful last season in points per game. He was not even top 40 at the position. Marvin Harrison Jr. averaged 9 points per game last season. That was worse than Keenan Allen, George Pickens, Khalil Shakir. It was worse than Quentin Johnston on a points per game basis. That is a major red flag from Marvin Harrison. And one thing about Marvin Harrison, I think he's measuring himself against his dad. I think he's going to have a very similar career as his father. And if we look at year 1, both Marvin Harrison Jr. and Marvin Harrison Sr. had pretty much identical stat lines in their rookie season. The only difference is that Harrison Sr. did it in 16 games, not 7. His stats did not improve at all in year 2. If we look at Marvin Harrison Sr.'s numbers in year 1, he averaged 10.2 points per game, and then in year 2, those numbers fell to 10 points per game. It was almost identical. His target share was the same. His catches did go up, but his yardage stayed identical and his touchdowns did decrease. He had 8 touchdowns as a rookie, only 6 touchdowns as a year 2 option. So I am kind of convinced, I might be totally wrong, but I'm pretty much convinced that Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to mirror his dad's performance once again. And if we look at Marvin Harrison Sr.'s numbers, if not for an injury in year 3, he never really got up to elite all-pro status until year 4. He was nothing special in his first 2 seasons in the NFL. Year 4, once he got Peyton Manning, his stats took off. He never looked back, and he made his case for all-pro every year. So that's kind of my concern with Marvin Harrison Jr. I think until he gets an elite quarterback, I do not trust him to elevate his game that much. I do not trust Kyler Murray anywhere near as much as most other people do. I really think Kyler Murray is holding this offense back. And if not for James Conner, I think they'd actually be floundering, struggling to score points. So last season, Kyler Murray only threw 21 touchdowns, and 8 of them went to Marvin Harrison Jr. Only 2 of them went to Trey McBride. And if you told me those stats flipped and Harrison had less than 5 touchdowns, McBride had 8+, I would not be that surprised. I don't think there's anything specific that's leading to a dominant target share for Marvin Harrison in the touchdown department. So I could see that dip. I do not think it's really going to go up very much. I don't think the Cardinals offense is going to have that ceiling available. And then there's also some rumors that maybe this is a team that Keenan Allen might sign with that would limit the target share as well. Because target share is the only thing that's keeping Harrison's argument to be drafted this high afloat. You're not worried about anyone other than Trey McBride. But last year, the targets were not that good for Marvin Harrison. He only averaged 6.8 targets per game. And really the only stats I can point to as to why he's being drafted in the top 20 is one game last season when Trey McBride was off the field. Harrison put up 13 fantasy points in that game when McBride was unavailable, and that would have been wide receiver 17 in points per game. That's basically even lower than where he's being drafted. And for you to tell me that he needs McBride off the field to pay off at this level is not something I want to bet on at all. He's really touchdown dependent. He's been really inconsistent in his rookie season, and I do not trust him to take a massive leap. Wide receiver 44 compared to wide receiver 25 is already a big leap to make, and I'm ranking him well below ADP, well below consensus. I am not a believer in Marvin Harrison Jr. at all this year, but I am trusting Tetairoa McMillan just based off the top 10 draft capital. It applies to Marvin Harrison Jr. as well. He was the 4th overall pick in 2024, and odds are there will be a breakout that is inevitable, but I'm not going to bet on it this year. I'm going to be fading Marvin Harrison Jr. this year a ton. I'm saying it right now. If you're in the subscriber league, expect my first nomination to be Marvin Harrison Jr. for $10, and I will refuse to bid on him as the price goes up. Go ahead and take him. I do not want Marvin Harrison Jr. at all on my roster. I think I'm ranking him potentially 5 spots too high at wide receiver 24. I could see him not pay off in the top 30 like he did not last season. I will happily take Davante Adams above Marvin Harrison Jr. in the 3rd round. So that's it for this video. We talked about wide receivers 12 through 24. And here's a reminder on the screen of all my tier-based rankings. I already went through Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Puka Nacua, Neighbors, Brian Thomas, Amon-Ra, Nico Collins, Drake London, AJ Brown, and Ladd McConkey in a previous video. If you want to check that out, I'll have it pinned up here. But the players we mentioned in today's video in tiers 5, Davante Adams, Tyreek Hill, T. Higgins, JSN, Garrett Wilson, and Xavier Worthy, wide receivers 12 through 17. And then wide receivers 18 through 24, a very flat tier, is Terry McLaurin, Courtland Sutton, Mike Evans in the top 20, and then Jameson Williams, DeVonta Smith, Tetairoa McMillan, and Marvin Harrison Jr. in the top 24. That's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'll have the top 37 receivers in our next video and also some win-loss picks coming up. It's almost August. We need to be ready for the draft. So stay tuned, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time. My name is Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching Nice and Blunt.